Mhm. All right, why don't I start off today? His parents, chapter 6 of the Silent Word. The father, this time, of creation's father, was Sheriar Mundagar, who was born in 1853 in the village of Khorramshahr in Iran, where his father was the poorly paid keeper of the Tower of Silence, to where those of the Zoroastrian faith are taken at death to be consumed by vultures. The boy's mother died early, and he was taken care of by his sister Pila. He had no schooling and played by himself much of the time at the place of his father's work. At 12 years, he left home and led an ascetic's life for 8 years, when he briefly returned home and then left Iran and went to India, accompanied by his elder brother Kodadad, and continued his life as a dervish for nearly 10 years. Kodadad had no liking for a monk's life and got work. Later, he returned to Iran, but visited his brother many times, and as time went on, began to recognize who the son of his brother was. Even at 80, as a mark of his respect, he refused the horse cart seat to Nagar to bring him to the ashram and walked the 6 miles. Once in the Rajasthan desert, Sheriarji was at the extremity of thirst when an old man appeared before him with a water skin and gave it to him to drink. When he had drunk a little and washed death from his eyes and drunk some more and looked up, the man had vanished. At another time, he attempted the terrible 40 days fast in which the aspirant, after drawing a circle on the ground and taking a seat within it, invites and subdues to his will the animal forms of infatuation, greed, lust, and anger. But he gave up after 30 days. A voice told him that the fruits of such austerities were not for him, but that a greater reward would be his. He went to Bombay and stayed with his sister Pila, who, with her husband, had recently emigrated from Iran to escape the petty, although numerous annoyances and persecutions to which the Mohammedans subjected the Zoroastrian minority. She desired her brother to marry and offered to find him a suitable wife in the community. But the dream of the road and the begging bowl was still between his eyes. However, she persisted, and one day, to be rid of her importunities, Sheriarji, pointing to a little girl skipping along the street, said he would marry her. Pila thought he was joking, but he was adamant, that girl or no one. So she went to see the child's mother, who agreed to the proposal in spite of the great difference in years. When she told her husband, he was astounded, but she said she had given her word and he should respect it. So he gave in, not too ungracefully, for Sheriaji was, after all, reckoned by the community as a very good match. So they were betrothed. 9 years later, that is, in 1892, when Shirin was 14 and Sheriarji was 39, they were married. In the interval, he thoroughly prepared himself for his new life, taking a job as a gardener and applying himself so well that he became a head gardener. He taught himself to read and write Persian and also Gujarati and Marathi, the principal languages of Bombay. Shirin's father was Dorab, the son of a silk merchant. Against his father's wish, he married Golandan, or Rose, and his father disinherited him. He went to India and opened a small restaurant in Pune. Golandan was so beautiful, with her rosy cheeks, jet black hair, and large eyes, that people used to say she was well named. She bore 11 children and remained beautiful, slim, and straight backed until she died at 85. The names of only 6 out of the 11 come into the story. The others had the fortune to be kin to God-man, but it was not their share to know him. So their names have already been forgotten. The 6 were Dotlat, Shirin, Dinshaw, Rustam, Pila, and Banu. Shortly after their marriage, Shariarji and Shirin went to Pune, where they bought a house in Butler Mohalla, so named because of the number of butlers during the British Raj who lived there. And it was in Dastor Meher Road. Many years later, the Mohalla was renamed Meher Mohalla, or Meher Place. Because of a pumpkin-shaped stone by the door, the house came to be known as Pumpkin House. 2 years later, that is in 1894, at 5 o'clock in the morning, in the David Sassoon Hospital, the Lord of the World, Avatar Meher Baba, was born and was named Merwan. He had been preceded 1 year by Jamshed and was followed by 7 other children. Jal, 8 years later, Behram, 6 years, Ardashir, 6 years, 2 more boys, Jahangir and Shirmand, and a sister, Franey, came in between but died young. The last child, a girl, Manija, was born in 1918, 4 years after Ardashir. Shirin had no interest in her first child, Jamshed, preferring dolls she could pick up and put down rather than a baby to look after. So he was given to Shirin's sister, Daulat, and her husband, Ferdun, in adoption. It was Merwan's birth that awakened her motherhood, and it was to Merwan that she gave her whole life and thought. A little while before his birth, Shirin Mai, on 2 separate nights, had dreams. In one, a Hindu goddess rose out of the well near the house and held out her arms for the child. And in the other, a multitude looked towards her with great expectancy. Shariarji said the dreams portended that the child would become a great light in the world. Somebody has to mute. Gazing at the newborn child, Shariarji remembered the voice in the desert which had told him that the fruits of his austerities would be something quite different from what he had been striving after. It could well be that his fulfillment was to be through his son. Shirin Mai was not interested in great lights. Had they not the light of the prophet Zoroaster to guide their lives? Her Merwan would be a great man, looked up to and respected in the community. From the beginning, the child was very active, and while his mother was busy with her housework, would crawl away. So she took to tying one end of a sari round him and the other end to the leg of a table. One day she found him playing with a cobra. She screamed, and the snake vanished. As soon as he was old enough, he was taken each day to a kindergarten, the Padamji Gujarati school, situated in Main Street, now called Mahatma Gandhi Road, where the Madan Pharmacy and Kashmir stores now are. And at 5 years, he went to the Camp Government English School. It was Shirin Mai's ambition that her son would become a great man, but there was little love and affection for the child. Once, because of a bowel weakness, a weakness he was to carry all his life, she beat him. And Shariarji, when he heard of it, said, "You don't know whom you have beaten." Because of her harshness, the boy used to spend much of his time with Shirin Mai's sister, Pila, who lived nearby. This angered Shirin Mai, and she forbade him to go to his aunt's. It is not known how Shariarji earned a living during these first years of guardianship of Godman, but after some time they moved to a new building at Quarter Gate, where he opened a tea shop, over which they lived. It is still a tea shop and has been named Cafe Shariar. But whether to honor Shariarji is not or not, is not known. The shop was successful, and he opened a second one nearly opposite the Jain Mandir in the cantonment. During the following years, at different times, he also had 5 toddy shops in Sachapur Street, Mund, Baramati, on the Sholapur Road, Telegaon, 25 or 30 miles from Pune, to which he moved for the period of occupancy, and Chopari, a suburb outside the cantonment. Okay, next chapter. Can we have another reader?
I wanted to, I just got to shut a door.
I need a tissue.
Okay,
right.
it's rolling.
Chapter 7, Merwan. From Quarter Gate, Merwan attended St. Vincent's High School, where English, the language of commerce and the key to civil appointment, was given importance. The community was, and still is, can you roll up a bit? Is it Eugene? Can you roll the text?
No, that's Marvin.
Oh, sorry, Marvin. Okay. Can you move? Oh, where's Marvin? Oh, he's gone. uh, mm,
Here, I'll pause the recording while we
okay.
wait for him to return. Go ahead.
Okay. The community was and still is the the most Western-oriented people in India. They all speak English fluently with a rich musical accent, as well as English, which was to become the vehicle of God-man's discourse and messages, and Gujarati, which he once said he had never liked. It has no music and a poverty of words. That was his quote. Merwan also learnt Marathi, on which Baba was later to comment, even God could not understand it as written and spoken by scholars. And Hindi and Urdu, the sweet-sounding language of the poet-singers, and Persian, which he had already been studying with his father and which later he said he had mastered thoroughly. He he excelled in the literature subjects, but was only average in maths and science. He played the street and back playground games that under different names boys all over the world play, called by Merwan and his friends Atya Patya, Gilli Danda, and Sur Sur Kati, also a fastball throwing and catching game called Seven Tiles, played with teams. 50 years later, Baba played this game with Western men visiting him at his ashram. And marbles, which he was to play with a small boy in Australia when he visited that country. Merwan played cricket and hockey for his school. His interest in cricket continued all through his life. It became an important tool in his world work, and many notable cricketers came to him. He played draughts and cards, and these games were continued throughout his life. He wrote poems under the pen name of Huma, which were published in the school magazine. He also created and conducted a club called the Cosmopolitan Club, which was based on spiritual and ethical values. Both older and younger boys came to him to settle their disputes. He also took part in school theatricals and was an avid reader of Sexton Blake and other detective writers. During the last years at Meherazad, detective fiction became an important item of time pass. When it was his sister Mani's duty to read to him for an hour in the afternoon. During this period, there was a sudden revival in England of these early thrillers. At this same time, he also had Tolkien's Lord of the Rings read to him. Quite early, he developed a passion for the Persian master poet Hafiz, and this also carried through to the very end of his world's day. Except for the occasion which he once told his disciples about when, at 7 years, he was reading the life of Buddha and felt for a fleeting moment that he too would become great like him. There was nothing to suggest to the boy and those around him of his mission. Let's see. But it was noticed by many that he looked different and behaved differently from the other boys, but none could say in what lay the difference. But no doubt it was this difference which caused the others to trust him. He once said, "For 3 years during my schooling," can you scroll up again? "For 3 years during my schooling at St. Vincent's, I used to bow down to my father every morning before leaving the house. Later on, he used to burn incense and pray before my picture." As mentioned earlier, Shirin Mai had given her first child, Jamshed, who was 1 year older than Merwan, to her sister Daulat, who, with her husband Ferdun, lived in Lonavla on the Pune-Bombay Railway, where the Ghats stepped down to the plains. Ferdun had a restaurant, and being a chef himself and doing his own cooking, it flourished. Merwan used to spend most of his school holidays with his aunt and uncle, and the two boys became great chums and loved each other intensely. Of the boys with whom they made friends, some eventually came to know who their playmate was. One of them, Sailor, was one of the very first to come to Merwan when he began his mission, and he remained to the end. One of the customers at the restaurant was a hunchback who was a marvelous storyteller and would entertain everyone for hours on end. And he who had outspilled the tale of the universe would listen fascinated by this man's inventions. About the time that Merwan began to attend St. Vincent's, Dalat and Ferdun sold the restaurant, moved to Pune, to the locality in the cantonment called Char Badi, Four Wells, which takes in Khan Bahadur Jan Mohammed Road, where Babajan had her seat. Here they opened a tea shop, which Babajan used to go to sometimes, and they would give her tea and snacks without charge. At the same time, Shireen Bai and Shariarji, something, yeah,
Move.
moved from Quarter Gate to Bhagwan Das Chal. Can we just get rid of that picture there? Oh, well, okay. Chal, a terrace which runs off Bawani Peth Road, which is to the left, and behind Babajan's seat as one faces it. So the two houses were quite close, and the boys were always backwards and forwards between them. The boys' love for each other did not at times prevent them from quarreling, and there was a great row one night in the sitting room, and Merwan knocked down the hanging center oil lamp, which caused a small fire and much panic. Merwan matriculated and went to Deccan College, one of the seats of learning in India. But Jamshed failed in his sixth standard examination and left school and helped his foster parents. Merwan would leave Bhagwan Das Chaul in the morning on his bicycle, turn left into Khan Bahadur Jan Mohammed Road, and just opposite the neem tree turn right into Malcolm Tank Road, now called Rao Sahib Kedri Road. He must quite early have been noticed the little old woman sitting under the tree, and noted at times the crowds who came for her darshan. But such things are common in India and do not excite one's curiosity. They are part of the landscape. But one afternoon on his way home, she beckoned to him, and he went straight to her, attracted, as he himself said much later, as a piece of iron to a magnet. And she kissed him between the eyes. Then Merwan went on home, and the world around him vanished, and he kissed the threshold of divine consciousness. And after 3 days, Babajan took him into his own presence, that is, into the presence of feeling who he was, eternal bliss. The absolute knowledge of who he was came 9 months later, but the exercise of his power took 7 years to accomplish. To his mother, Merwan was stricken with some strange malady, which none of the doctors she called in could cure. So, thinking that he might be the victim of witchcraft, she called in exorcists. When they too failed to restore her son to normality, she stormed off to Brabazon and demanded to know what she had done to her son, for she had in the meantime heard about the holy woman's embrace. Brabazon told her, Merwan is not your son. He belongs to the world and is destined to change the world. Leave him alone and don't be anxious about him. But Shariarji, remembering the voice which had told him that his divine share would be much greater than the fruits of austerities, rejoiced, for he inwardly knew that his son would become one of the great ones. He tried to comfort Shireen Mai, telling her that they were greatly blessed in their son, but this talk only infuriated her the more. The family had been living in Bhagwan Das Chaul for 3 years, and now moved back to Pumpkin House, which Shariarji in the meantime had bought. It is still in possession of the family. Here, Merwan spent the days either locked in his attic room or wandering aimlessly about. He would take his food up to his room and put it in a drawer to later take out and give to dogs. Sometimes the family below would hear a rhythmic knocking as he beat his head on the table. He went in his wanderings as far as Bombay and stayed with his brother Jamshed, going to the beach at Chowpatty in the mornings and in the afternoons to a particular bench in Victoria Gardens. Thus 9 months went by when Merwan felt drawn towards Sai Baba at Shirdi. He was accompanied by his boyhood friend, Sailor. As they approached the ashram, Sai Baba was returning from the latrines, accompanied by musical instruments. Merwan threw himself in the dust before him, and the master shouted, Parvardigar, sustainer and protector, and passed on. This shout tore the veil between bliss and knowledge, and Merwan remembered fully who he was. At the same time, proclaimed to the world that the Ancient One, God, the Eternal Beloved, was about to step down into it for its renewal and heart ease. Some little distance away there was a totally emaciated naked man who sitting outside the temple. This was Kashinath Upasni, who, after 4 years with Sai Baba, had just been brought down by that master to worldly consciousness. For his share in the avataric manifestation was extremely sensitive to intrusion. Like a snake which has just shed its skin, which was how Erich, who comes into the story later on, put it. Merwan rose and went towards him, and when he was a little way off, Upasni Maharaj welcomed him by flinging a stone at him, hitting him on the same spot where Babajan had kissed him, and so beginning immediately God-man's downcoming. Merwan was the son of reality, S-U-N, son. Maharaj's work was to help him establish his authority and assert his godhood, to cause the sun to shine in its own shadow without dispelling that shadow. For the shadow is the illusion without which the divine love game of lover and beloved could not continue. Concerning these things, many years later, Baba said, Babajan made me feel what I am. Sai Baba made me know who I am. And Maharaj gave me God's powers, which had always been mine. After a few days, Merwan returned to Pune, and Maharaj went to Kharagpur in West Bengal and stayed in the scavengers' colony. Being a Brahmin, caste had been one of the tightest knots in his consciousness to undo. Now, sitting on a throne of refuse, he sang to those outcasts, not in the words of his mouth, but in those of his love. Your God is as great as the God of the Brahmins, and the Brahmins have cast you out. but I welcome you to come into the temple of my love. Whoever and whatever comes into this temple goes out from it purified." And the people worshipped him, for he had set a light in the depths of their misery and given them new hope. In Pune, Merwan stayed with his parents, who had moved to the house opposite, 765 Dastur Meher Road Cantonment. In the small yard at the back was a tiny shed with a flagstone floor, and on one of the flags which projected, he would beat his head for hours at a time. The beating of his head was because of the struggle to retain the bliss of reality and at the same time fulfill the purpose of his descent. It gave relief from his infinite spiritual suffering and anchored his purpose, enabling him, under the cover of his person, to sneak reality into illusion, without illusion at this stage being aware of reality's presence. Every blow was an announcement, "I have come." But illusion heard only the sound of a man knocking his head on a stone. It did not know that the soil of world consciousness around the tree of grace was being dug so that the tree-laden branches would hang down with the fruit of oneness for all humanity to pluck and eat. This head knocking went on in varying degrees for the whole 7 years of the coming down from his godhood to humanity and his stabilization as God-man. Then he would emerge from his confinement, and after tying a scarf around his head so that his mother could not see the abrasions, he would wander off again. On one of these wanderings took him to Narayan Maharaj, and the same one, or another, it matters little, to Tajuddin Baba. It matters little may appear to be a flippancy, but the truth is that although everything Avatar does, even his merest movement, has significance, the time sequence of his actions has no meaning to us because there is no development in his life and mission. It begins in perfection and ends in perfection, and is perfect in every moment of it. The two masters just mentioned had had no outward roles in the avataric drama, but it was necessary for Merwan to outwardly declare himself to them. Returning again to Pune, Merwan started helping his father in the Sachapir Street toddy shop. He would advise the customers to drink in moderation, not so much because of the alcoholic content, which was very low, but because of their purses, and to remember God over the shop. Oh, and remember God, period. Over the shop was a large room which he rented and used to gather the drinkers into it and encourage them to express their intoxication in choruses in praise of God. Sitting on the floor, they would drink and sing the classical couplets of the poet saints to lively tunes. Word of this spread about, with the result that customers left the places they were wont to frequent and came here, where there was real conviviality and no squalid drunkenness. When he closed the shop at night, Merwan would go to Brabazon and sit with her and scratch her back while she chatted with him. During the cold months, he always took firewood for the little fire she kept burning. Often he wished to his feast his friends, but since all the takings of the shop were handed over to his mother, um, and she only gave him a miserable allowance, he could not do so. So on Thursdays and Sundays at 4 in the morning, Arti would be sung and prasad distributed, and on Sunday evenings all would gather and free discussion was encouraged. In the meantime, Maharaj had returned from Kharagpur to the Khandoba temple at Shirdi. In later years, Baba once told of an incident which occurred at this time. He said, about 1915, not before 15 and not after 16, Maharaj was living in the Khandoba temple and Gustaji was still with Sai Baba. Maharaj took me and Gustaji by train to Kapolgaon, Dabadi, Here we climbed a high hill in the pouring rain. On this hill was a cave into which Maharaj took us, and we sat there for a while. Returning to the town, we took the train to Kasara station, where we got off and went to the village of Shahpur. Here we sat on a wall. We went back to Kopolagaon. Maharaj returned to the temple, Gustaji to Sai Baba, and I to Pune. Then Maharaj left the place and went to Sakori, a village 3 miles away, where he cleared a small area of stones and thorn bushes and fixed up a shelter. This place became his permanent seat. When word of this came to Merwan, he went to Maharaj and stayed some days and cleared more of the ground and built a proper hut for him. Shireen Mai continued to fret and storm and would go to Babajan, and Babajan would talk to her as an old friend, repeating that Merwan was not hers, for he belonged to the whole world. But Shireen would answer, I don't care about the whole world. I just want to see him as a success in the world. Instead of following some brilliant career in instead of following some brilliant career, his life is being wasted and ruined. She would go home consoled for a while, but she never understood who her son was. Once, later on, she said to some of the disciples, You may worship Merwang, but I have spanked him. At another time, she said, Don't say he is Zoroaster. Say, like Zoroaster. Once she went to Sakori and confronted Maharaj with his part in the stealing away of her son. As is customary in India, when one visits a master, she took a garland of flowers for him. After she had taken his darshan and put the garland round his neck, he said, Why have you brought me a garland of old shoes? Oh, Maharaj, Shireen said, how can you call these lovely flowers old shoes? And I went to so much trouble to keep them fresh all the way here. Maharaj laughed and said, When you were coming along in the train, didn't you say to yourself, Flowers indeed, I should be taking an old shoe to beat him. Shireen Mai was ashamed and begged his forgiveness. Merwan visited Maharaj frequently over a period of 7 years. Often they sang together far into the night. Sometimes Merwan sang. The longest stay was for 3 months. At the end of the whole period, he asked one, Bailey Irani, to write a biography of Maharaj, Sakarina Sadguru, or the Perfect Master of Sakori, and supplied him with much first-hand information. Later, it was translated into Urdu. There were 3 people who were singularly blessed with service during this period. Gustaji, Yeshwant Rao, a farmer and disciple of Maharaj's, who served Merwan with tea and pan during the long night sessions, and Durgamai, whom Maharaj used to call his mother. One day, Maharaj said to Merwan, You are God descended in human form for the salvation of the world. I bow down to you. To Gustaji and Yeshwant Rao, he said, I have given my charge to Merwan. Leave me and go with him. And to Bua Sahib, he said, Your friend is now spiritually perfect. Stick to him and obey him in everything. Maharaj also told his Brahmin disciples that Merwan was avatar, but for too long had they been jealous of the attention given by their guru to this fire worshipper, and their spiritual gullets rejected that morsel of morsels, the news that God-man was here. They had forgotten the glorious teaching of Krishna, Age after age I come. His flute could not be heard above the ritual temple bells. Merwan was now avatar in every sense and meaning of that word, and beyond all senses and meanings. God descended, veiled and unveiled, but veiled again according to our veils, unknowable except by his grace. Yet because that grace encompasses all things and every one, it is easier to come to know him than to know oneself. He now returned to Pune, taking Gustaji with him.
Sure, I can read.
Go ahead.
Okay, part 2, chapter 8, Kasbapeth. There was a young Irani, Behram Ferdun, whom Merwan started to teach Persian. He had an enormous mustache, and Merwan nicknamed him Bua Sahib, or respected sir. Shireen Mai was delighted when she heard about the lessons. At last, Merwan was doing something. She found some more pupils for him, but he refused them. So Shirin Mai's ever-active mind thought of another plan. She approached Bua Sahib with the suggestion that he open a toddy shop and take Merwan in as a partner. She would put up the money and take half the profits. Bua Sahib would take half, and Merwan would have some employment. Bua Sahib agreed and found a shop in Kasbapeth. The business went well, and as Bua Sahib gave his share of the takings to Merwan, Merwan now had plenty of money to spend. Much of it went into buildings at Sakori and in feasting the villagers, always directing their attention to Maharaj and effacing himself in his beloved Guru. But he did not neglect his friends and took them on picnics and spread tasty feasts for them, prepared by Dalat Masi, Shireen Mai's sister, always with plenty of bhajans to spice the names of God. Thus Merwan first made them worryless and gave them the opportunity to express freely their love for God. This was to be his principal teaching during his world stay and became reduced in its simplest terms to, don't worry, be happy. These men were so entranced with Merwan's way and manner that they became his lifelong companions and disciples who vied with one another to pick up his words as he spoke and not let them fall to the ground. Later, the hardships came, as they must where love is concerned, but they were equipped then to bear them. Gustaji worked in the shop during the day and waited on Babajan through the night. At 5 a.m, when an Irani tea shop opposite opened, he would fetch tea for her, and then trot off to the shop, sweep it, receive the barrels of toddy, and open the doors. On his way, he would buy a bunch of spinach, which he boiled in the early afternoon for his meal for the day. Then sleep for a couple of hours and be ready for work again. Every night on his way to Babajan, he would take half the day's takings to Shireen Mai, and every night she would complain about the amount. So he would put the money on the table and escape as quickly as he could. Are we going to pause? Who's reading now?
Well, that was
Well, I
very
guess there's
good. If
just
you want
me.
to read a little more,
What?
I said you could read a little more. That was a
Okay,
short
if you'd
chapter.
like. Okay, I'd love to read about Gustaji.
Okay.
Okay, chapter 9. The story of Gustaji. Gustaji Nasrwanji Hansoshia was, as his surname indicates, of Hansot, a village in Gujarat, and his first name and father's name, Nusserwanji, declared that he was a Parsi of an earlier migration from Iran than Shariarji's and Shireen Mai's. He had 4 brothers, Manshurshir, Sorat, Homi, and Ardashir, who later was nicknamed Slamson by Baba. He was a short, small-boned man with fair and delicate complexion and of the same age as Merwan. He went to Bombay and got a job with a photographer who also imported frames and mounts and lithographs of Indian deities from Germany. He also took lessons in singing and harmonium. His teacher told him about Sai Baba, And shortly after he met Homi, who had also gone to Bombay, and he also spoke of Sai Baba, and they decided to go together and have his darshan. It was customary for visitors to the ashram to be asked by the master to empty their purses, leaving them only their return tickets. He asked Gustaji, but not Homi. After the evening darshan, they returned to Bombay, and Homi went on to his job in a distillery up country. Gustaji was deeply impressed with Sai Baba and told his boss about him, and on some holiday when the shop was closed, took him to Shirdi, and he also became a devotee and hung a big picture of the master in his shop. Gustaji met other devotees of Sai Baba and became thoroughly saturated with thoughts about him. One day, Ardashir, who had a tea shop in Bombay, said that he was going to Shirdi to stay for some days. Gustaji couldn't resist the temptation of going too. Remembering the experience of his first visit of being left without his return fare, he put aside the amount in a separate pocket, thinking with the native cunning of a man unenlightened that if the master asked for the money, he would give him what he had apart from the return fare. After they had had his darshan, Sai Baba said to Gustaji, "Give me what you have." The immediate thing the master was asking for was money, but the ultimate what you have was his life. The old English highwayman, it is said, used to level a pistol at a traveler's head with "your money or your life." But the master under his breath was saying, "First your money, then your life. For to die in him, one must become penniless." Gustaji gave what he had except for the amount put aside. Sai Baba asked, "You have given me all you have?" "Yes, Baba." "Then how will you return to Bombay?" Gustaji said that he had kept aside his return fare. The master said, "So, you are trying to cheat me, are you? I said, give me all you have. Come on, hand it over." They stayed a week, paying for expenses out of Ardashir's money. Back in Bombay, Gustaji became very restless, and after some time gave up his work and went to Shirdi to live. Leaving his bedroll and trunk at a house, he approached the master and had his darshan, but the master took no notice of him. He settled into a routine of the place, spending the days in the master's presence, but not presuming to sit near him, just squeezing unobtrusively into the back of the congregation. And after his evening meal at a small cafe run by a devotee who was not after making money, but only to keep his family and serve visitors to his master, he retired to the end of a veranda for the night, for which he had obtained permission. Gradually, over a period of time, he edged forward at the assemblies, hoping that the master would say something to him. But it seemed that the master was unaware of his presence. Some 2 months went by, and then one morning, when Gustaji bowed to him before taking his seat, Sai Baba seemed to notice him as though he had just arrived. And after the assembly broke up, spoke to him privately. Assuming a look of helplessness, he said that he was very short of money, and could Gustaji arrange to let him have 500 rupees immediately? Gustaji was so overwhelmed by the manner of the plea that he folded his hands before him and went to get it. Gustaji had brought that exact amount with him, but had spent 50 rupees of it in advance for meals. He went and got the 450 rupees from his trunk and gave them to the master, who counted them and remarked that it was 50 rupees short of what he had asked for. Gustaji explained that explained that shortage and added that he had given him all he had. Sai Baba said, "Try and raise the other 50 rupees somewhere. I need 500 very badly, and if you can get it, I will never ask you again for money." This appeal by the master to him, when there were so many rich devotees to whom he could have gone, was too much for Gustaji, and said he would get it somehow. But how? Should he telegraph one of his brothers to send the amount? Or should he go round the town with a begging bowl and a plausible story? Then he remembered that he had brought with him a fine new blanket which he could try to sell. A rich devotee offered him 50 rupees for it, although it was worth nowhere near that. Gustaji took the money to the master, who was very pleased with him. Then, one evening when he went for his meal, he found that his credit had run out. Still, he had a few rupees left, which he kept in his trunk. But when he returned to his veranda spot, his trunk and bedroll and even his hat had gone. Inquiries brought back nothing. No one was interested in helping him to recover them. To both Hindus and Mohammedans, he was an outsider who had no business being there anyway. He now slept under a tree. Earth is softer than hard stone. On the weekly holiday, Thursday, Guru's Day, when crowds of devotees came, there would be distribution of sweets and fruits. Whatever was offered him, he accepted, but he never thrust himself forward. After 6 months of this subsistence, he was like a skeleton, and his clothes were getting ragged. The master seemed to have forgotten him again. Each day he went to the assembly. Today might be the day when the master's heart would be touched, and he would bestow on him at least a glance of encouragement. Then one evening, when the Koali nightingales had laid siege to the rose's heart, Sai Baba gave a little discourse on grace by action, or karma yoga, saying that there was no action better than feeding a hungry brother. Some of the householder disciples took the hint, and for a while Gustaji was well fed, too well fed, for his shrunken stomach revolted at the rich fare. However, no one invited him twice, and soon he was left again to starve. So Gustaji continued until Sai Baba dropped his body. Then he went to Sikori, for he knew about Maharaj, and Maharaj in due course gave him to Mirwan. Jai Baba.